joining us. This is Paul Wilson.
And Chris Emke.
And you're listening to Diesel Performance Podcast. Chris, I'm excited.
There's been a lot of stuff going on.
That's right. But most importantly, we have a huge sale going on over at Calibrated Power Duramax Tuner.
Yes, we do. So 15% off switch on the fly tuning, whether it's on EFI Live or on EasyLink. And I think it comes at a really good time. We know we have our 50-state legal tuning available for 01 to 16 Duramax and the 2016 to 2020 2.8. So a lot of exciting stuff. Not to mention, we're in a new studio space.
That's right. That's right. So we've had probably 4 or 5 different recording spaces throughout the years of the podcast.
Remember the original? In an open office with a round table that we'd all have to talk into like a microphone.
Yes.
That's wild. Look where we're at now.
and then an
floor.
Office with blankets, and then remember the garage in Bay 3 in Marengo?
Yeah, our temporary space because we were shifting buildings and whatnot. And then we'd have to yell at the machine shop guys because they were too loud when we were trying to do stuff. There was a bordering wall next to an old like 1960s fucking air compressor. Yeah, the good old days.
It was. That's a throwback.
We've come a long way.
So now, we did a little bit of DIY elbow grease, put up some fancy stuff here to try to help out with the sound a little bit. Yeah. And I think it's good. I think one of the other things we're doing is we're working towards evolving the show. So we're always trying to make Diesel Performance Podcast better and help it be more effective place for people to learn about diesel performance in the future. So we are talking about some other elements that we'll be adding here in the near future. We'll be excited to announce that stuff as time goes on. But for today...
Speaking of elements and growth.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Let's dive in, Chris. We're going to be talking about emissions compliance with Peter Treydte from SEMA Garage.
Right. So emissions compliance and calibrated power, what you and I deal with on a day-to-day basis, is nothing new. I think our show and everything that we talk about is definitely looking at the bigger picture, right? Things that we've talked about where the industry is evolving towards. And there's a lot of talk about, CARB, EO, EPA, and SEMA Garage. All get thrown into this. What is SEMA, right? What is that? And how does SEMA, come into play and work with EPA and CARB and things like that? So we have Peter Treydte from SEMA Garage, who's going to kind of explain some of this for us.
That's right. So we'll be talking with Peter. Of course, guys, we're going to be hearing from our remote support expert, Sean Lynn. And as always, we'll check in with our super tech, Jeremy Garnett. But for now, like you said, Chris, let's dive in and talk with Peter.
Cool.
Peter Treydte, Director of Emissions Compliance over at SEMA Garage. How the hell are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you guys doing?
It's a beautiful start to a Thursday. The weather's nice outside, so it's, we're both in good, chipper moods.
Absolutely. Yeah. Add my coffee.
That's great to hear. I'm looking forward to heading out your direction in December for the PRI show.
Oh,
there you
awesome.
go. That's a terrible time of the year to come into the Midwest, but
they
cool.
Have PRI in a city you can't drive cars in, really. Like it's not bad, but it's not great.
Indiana's sweet.
Yeah.
In the dead of winter.
In the dead of winter. Yeah. Well, hey, at least it's a fun show to go to, right?
That's right. It's always it's a good diversion, and the thing I like about Indianapolis in the winter is you have all those Habitrail catwalks, so you can go from one building to another without going out into the elements.
Very true. Such a Midwest thing.
Very true. Yeah, it is.
100%.
I'm pretty sure every Chicago building has, for all the hospitals or whatever, same thing. So
yeah, got to get between them, man.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, hey, Peter, we had you on today to dive into talking more about emissions compliance and talking a little bit about SEMA, but we'd like to get started with knowing a little bit about your background in automotive performance.
All right. Well, I've been with SEMA since 2014 as Director of Emissions Compliance. Prior to that, I was working for Gale Banks Engineering. I was there for about 20 years. Did a lot of the emissions compliance work there. So that's kind of where I cut my teeth on really knowing and understanding what was involved with emissions compliance. Going a little further back, I actually started my automotive career building racing engines out of four-cylinder Ford Pinto motors. And so kind of got a little bit of, that's really where I learned about internal combustion, the internal combustion process, and kind of how how an engine is built. I didn't know anything about diesel until I started at Banks, and learned everything pretty much that you could know about diesel from Gale, and of course that included doing some of the emissions compliance stuff.
That's crazy. So, in the industry, right, there's all these assumptions, right? And here you have someone, director of emissions compliance over at SEMA, and he has 20 years plus experience in diesel from a very reputable source.
Yeah.
Now heading, some of the compliance stuff. So, it's nice to hear that, the guys that are fronting some of that stuff with the testing have diesel knowledge prior.
Also some frontline experience.
Exactly.
I think that's something that is really appealing to our listeners, is being able to hear from somebody who has that kind of background on both sides of it.
Yeah.
A little bit of gas,
Yeah.
a lot of diesel, and a lot of testing, because I know I got a
and
chance.
has grown through the years of the industry as the industry's evolved.
Sure.
So.
And I was going to say, I know I got a chance to see Banks's facility back in 17, maybe roughly right around there. We got a chance to go out there with the podcast and see some of that testing equipment. How did that equipment progress throughout the years? What did that look like throughout the years of just the general emissions testing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Gale loves data, and that's one of the things that I got exposed to while I was working there is just the methods to get data is to have equipment that can measure things, and so Gale is a lover of equipment, of data, accessing data, and so that involves dynamometers, it involves sensing equipment, ways to measure temperatures and pressures, and just anything that is going on in that engine, and in the case of emissions, coming out of the engine, out of the tailpipe. Gale's got a whole emissions setup there, and an emissions bench that basically mimics the type of equipment that we use for doing our certification work. So, learning how to both gather data and analyze data was something that I spent a lot of time doing at Banks.
That's interesting. And then coming over to SEMA, what was that change like? Was that, going from, the aftermarket world and working on, I would imagine, a lot of R&D projects to moving into the compliance testing, was that a big shift for you?
I wouldn't say it was a huge shift. What the biggest shift was that I would, part of what my job was at Banks with emissions compliance there, it was probably about 30% of my job there. I just took that, and now I was doing it for a broader cross-section of the industry. To be fair, emissions compliance is confusing. It is not an easy thing to understand. So, for companies that are developing product and are trying to figure out, how do I go through these processes, it really is worthwhile for SEMA to be able to offer services that unravel those mysteries for them.
So you kind of tee us into my interest. What is SEMA? All right, like we hear about it. I know the trade show in Las Vegas, but what is SEMA for our listeners?
Yeah, it is something that I think a lot of people don't actually know. Is what in the world does SEMA do the remaining 360 days of the year? We are a trade association. We are a nonprofit organization that represents an industry, and the industry that we represent is the specialty equipment market. So it's, I always tell people it's all the stuff for your vehicle that you don't need. When we talk about aftermarket, there's really two sides to it. There's the aftermarket parts that are replacement parts, right? You need a new alternator for your car. So you go down to Pep Boys and you get another alternator. That's a replacement part. But specialty equipment is all the things that make your vehicle special. So, it's the styling things, wheels and tires, the suspension kits, the performance products. That's the specialty equipment side of the aftermarket. And so SEMA was formed years ago when manufacturers of performance products started to realize that they needed some organization to kind of defend them in situations or stand up for them in situations where, there were government rules that were coming into play that could affect their businesses and things like that. So that's really how SEMA formed, was to provide a resource for businesses that were making these types of products. So in terms of what we do, the trade show is what we're known for, right? That's what makes all the videos and gets the media attention. But we also offer other services, and the part that I'm involved with, the emissions compliance, is kind of a subset of the SEMA Garage. SEMA Garage is what I call a collection of product development tools, and so we offer various things that help our members with designing their products. And of course, emissions compliance is part of that, making sure that your products can get to market legally. That's really what emissions compliance is all about.
That's awesome. That's a great description
Great
of it.
way to
because I
break
think
it down.
there's a lot that goes on behind it, like you said, the other 360 days that I know we're not tracking. I mean, when I hear SEMA, I think of giant lifted trucks with a lot of bling.
Well,
that's like
yeah,
our end of the industry is mostly what I saw represented there.
You're not wrong. I also, like, Paul, for what you and I do in talking to end users, there's also been, SEMA, and you have these terms of CARB, and you have these terms of emissions, related situations. So one of the things that is confusing to me, and I would like to kind of break things down or have Peter do so for us. What is the EPA versus CARB, and then what's SEMA's, angle in on that stuff? How do those three different groups come together, right? What does that look like?
The alphabet soup, yeah. So CARB and EPA are two government agencies that oversee air quality. So their job is to ensure that that businesses, individuals aren't breaking the law in ways that will impact ambient air quality. Now, both of EPA actually has oversight over things other than the air too. They kind of pay attention to what goes into the water and what goes into the ground, and the environment in general. They're the Environmental Protection Agency. California Air Resources Board, or CARB, they're specifically paying attention to air. And the reason that CARB even exists is because back in the 60s, when air quality was so horrible in California, the government, the state government at that time decided we got to do something about this. So they formed this agency to start paying attention to why do we have this smog, what's going on with this, how do we correct this, and that's how CARB was formed. EPA actually came along a little later than CARB, and because of that, CARB has been allowed to continue to exist. EPA has oversight over the entire country, all 50 states, but California has a special allowance to exist and to oversee the air quality in California because they predated the EPA.
Wow. So
for our industry, we see part of the reason that SEMA was formed was because we realized early on, hey, these agencies are starting to take shape. They're going to impact what happens to our industry and how our products are able to be sold. So SEMA has for 4 decades now has been paying attention to what these agencies allow and don't allow, and how we can both fit within the rules, but also make sure that the rules are not overly invasive and don't shut us out of existence altogether.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know a lot of this stuff gets dicey because when we read headlines, we see EPA activity and then we see CARB activity.
Right.
And a lot of times there is overlap where they're definitely like a company will get fined by the EPA, and then all of a sudden a little while later you hear that they got fined by CARB as well, or vice versa, right? Like, so it's like they kind of get double whacked. I always wondered about this allowance because my rough understanding is that CARB rules for air quality hold a higher standard than federal rules. So like it is harder to pass a CARB standard than it is to pass a federal standard. Is there any truth to that?
So historically, what we've seen, so automotive emissions standards and requirements have been in existence since the late 60s. And California established them first. So we actually see that vehicles were first regulated in California starting around 1965. In the rest of the states, EPA, the territory that EPA oversees, regulations didn't kick in until about 1967 or 68. So we have a little bit of a lag there. And over the course of time, the standards or the requirements that California has established have been a little bit tighter than what EPA has established. So what we have seen in the past is that automakers used to build two variations of a vehicle. They'd build one that met California emissions, and then a different one that met federal emissions, because they could get a little more power in some cases out of the federal emissions cars, or they wouldn't have to put as much emissions equipment on, so it wouldn't cost them as much to build the car, that kind of thing. So the standards have had a slight variation over the course of time. However, within the last few model years, the standards have become pretty much comparable between California and EPA, such that it no longer makes sense for the OEMs to build different variations of the vehicles. They just build one variation, and it meets the requirements for both California and EPA.
So they're just kind of defaulting to the higher standard.
To the higher standard, calling it a day.
That makes sense.
And the standards are pretty much the same at this point. So,
Gotcha.
So there's really no reason for them to build different variations on those vehicles.
Okay.
Yeah, I know Chris and I are both sitting here screaming LB7 in the back of our head.
Right, I'm thinking,
we're so used to dealing with LB7 style
LB7s, and then you.
Well, that's a great example.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example. So, at that time there was a federal version and a state version, a California version, because the standards were different. So the emissions equipment on those vehicles is slightly different for that very reason. The other thing that's worth noting in terms of a difference between EPA and CARB is that both agencies have the ability to enforce. So they both have the ability to levy fines and those kinds of things. But only CARB has a program by which you can demonstrate that you are emissions compliant. In fact, in order to legally sell products in California that are emissions related, you have to go through a demonstration process, and that results in a document known as a CARB executive order, or EO. You've probably heard of a CARB EO number. Does that product have a CARB EO number? And so that is basically a document that says, hey, this product has been demonstrated to be emissions legal for use in California. EPA doesn't have a program like that. So what's required for EPA is essentially a self-certification. Even though there's no program, they still require that you are able to demonstrate emissions compliance. Now, historically, that has the best way to be able to demonstrate that has been to get a CARB EO. So historically, SEMA has always encouraged our members to obtain CARB EOs, because once you do that, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're 50-state legal.
That's
wild.
the standard, once again.
I love that the EPA's plan is like, go ahead and do it, and if we decide you're wrong, we'll let you know with a fine. But yeah, no, I dig it. So SEMA works in here. Chris and I have some working knowledge of SEMA. Obviously over at Duramax Tuner, Calibrated Power, we now have 50 state legal custom tuning for a huge array of Duramaxes. So we worked with SEMA Garage to get that done. Yep. So guys, listeners, you've heard Tim Mahoney on the show. I think we even talked about the process at the time when we
talked with Nick on it as well.
We've talked with Nick on the past. So they were actually working with SEMA Garage and going through kind of what you were talking about there, that pursuit of emissions compliance, right? Getting that EO, that is the standard now. That's what all the distributors want. That's what all anybody who's a large player in the game. That's
doing
what
volume
we're
of
all going
sales.
for.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you walk us through a little bit of what that process looks like?
Yeah, for sure. So, and that's exactly why SEMA Garage exists, is to help our members to go through that process. And we have the right equipment, the right know-how to get that done. The process involves a round of certification tests. Now, I'll talk a little bit about emissions testing here. There's really different categories or levels of emissions testing that people are somewhat familiar with. It kind of starts with like a smog check program, right? In different places throughout the country, different states might have, some type of a smog check program. That's where some technician is looking at the vehicle and he's trying to assess whether it's passing emissions or whether it's, been modified in any particular way. In most cases, that's a very limited test. It involves maybe a sniffer that goes in the tailpipe. In California, there's really three parts to the inspection. There's a visual inspection that looks for, modifications that wouldn't be considered legal. There's also an OBD element where they plug into the OBD system and verify that there's no codes and that the OBD system is functioning properly. And then there's a snap idle opacity test where they just flip the throttle and make sure that you're not getting too dark of a cloud of smoke coming out the tailpipe. That's really all that's involved in California, and other states are similar to that, or other locations where there are smog checks. The next level up from that would be what I consider kind of an R&D level. So if you are trying to develop a product and you want to know, hey, how is this impacting emissions? One of the things you can do is get a 5-gas analyzer. And you can use that 5-gas analyzer to evaluate the gases, the actual emissions that are coming out of the tailpipe. And ideally, you'll do that in conjunction with a chassis dynamometer, something that can put some load on the vehicle, and you'll run the vehicle under conditions that will put the vehicle under load and give you some way of doing a comparative test. Then we get to the highest level, and that's what we call certification level testing. This is the same type of testing that the OEMs have to do to prove that their vehicles are meeting the standards that CARB and EPA set forth. These tests are what we call typically what we call drive trace tests. So there's a chassis dynamometer. It's very different than a horsepower dyno that we're all used to seeing. This is a dynamometer that is very specific in terms of the type of load that it puts on the vehicle. It's designed to mimic road load conditions. So, when you're driving your truck out on the road, you have to press down on the accelerator a certain amount to make it go a certain speed. And so we're trying to replicate that on an emissions dyno. While we're doing that, we're gathering all of the exhaust gases out of the tailpipe, and we are running them through an analyzer. And what we're measuring is we're looking at hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, oxides of nitrogen, and particulate mass. And particulate mass is basically the soot that you would see coming out of a tailpipe. So all of those things are evaluated, and then they're compared against a standard to ensure that that vehicle is below the set standard for the vehicle. So it's a very sophisticated level of test. As you mentioned, Calibrated has gone through that process. They've basically been able to show that their tunes are capable of meeting the emissions requirements. So you've got high horsepower tunes that are emissions legal, and that's really what we're all about, is being able to make those demonstrations of compliance.
Absolutely. And Chris,
that plug-in too is nice.
When I got to go out to Diesel Power Challenge, their street driving tests throughout the years had changed from actual street driving to being on a dyno. Yep. And my understanding, the story at the sewing circle will say, was that their test for that was actually developed from an emissions test.
Right.
Of actually saying, like, hey, here's the emission standards. This is how they do the testing. Okay, we need to kind of simulate something like that.
It's ironic, too, that Colorado is one of those states that adopted what California has going on, too, which is definitely interesting. And I like, Peter, when we're talking about a dyno, I ultimately in my head think power dyno, right? And there's different programs within dynos altogether in how that functionality shows how the truck responds, with the testing and things like that. So when, I guess, Peter, my question is, I send a truck to you, I want to have it tested. Does the truck live just on one dyno in one, kind of test? What's the length of that test? What does that look like as far as, hey, we have an idea of an R&D project we believe is going to be, a legal product, and then, is it just ship it on the dyno, this test is passed and it's done?
Well, that's such a good question, because I know we've watched 8 minutes on the dyno look like torture on a truck.
Yeah.
How long is an emissions test?
Yeah, good question. So the overall certification process takes about 4 days, and it starts with some OBD work. So we want to first verify. So let's use an example of a tune, right? A flash tune. So that flash tune is going to you're going to plug into probably the diagnostic port on the vehicle. You're going to use the device to flash the vehicle, and then that tune is what we're going to be testing. So one of the things that we'll do is we'll put it on a horsepower dyno to verify that the tune is doing what it claims to do. So we'll do a horsepower test to make sure that the tune is actually active. Then we're going to take it out on the road and we're going to drive it. We're going to drive it for a minimum of 50 miles, but it's oftentimes a diesel that's going to take more than that, and we've even seen it take upwards of 1,000 miles. What we're doing during that on the road driving is we're basically exercising the OBD system to make sure that, first of all, that no error codes exist. So you're not getting a check engine light on the dash. And secondly, that all of the internal monitors that are designed into the OBD system are able to do their function. And so that's why it takes a few miles is that the ECU has to go through all its different routines, and basically the OBD system has to give a thumbs up for a number of different monitors that it's paying attention to. Once that's done, then we bring it into the emissions test cell. One thing about the emissions test cell is, in order to make sure we always get consistent results, the emissions test cell is temperature and humidity controlled. So we always keep the temperature right around 75 degrees, humidity right around 50%. And that's just to give us consistent conditions, no matter where we're doing an emissions test, that we're always going to have those same ambient conditions. The vehicle goes on the dyno. We hook up the exhaust system to the analyzer, and then with the tests that we run, there's about 4 different variations of these road simulations. One of them involves starting the vehicle from a cold condition or from a room temperature condition. So we actually allow the vehicle to sit overnight, and then when we start the test, we're starting the engine for the first time, so it's capturing all of the stuff that would come out of the tailpipe before the catalyst is warm, before the DPF is warm. So you're going to get a little bit of emissions during that cold start where the emissions equipment isn't up to temperature yet. And then we simulate some city driving, we simulate some highway driving, and each one of those tests is identical every time. It's always the same exact conditions, and then we're gathering the exhaust gases during that test, and we're measuring and comparing against the standards. What we're actually evaluating is the mass of the emissions per distance. So in most cases, we're measuring grams per mile, and we look at, as I mentioned before, all those different things in the exhaust gas: hydrocarbons, NOx, CO. Those are all the things that we're evaluating.
Wow.
That's pretty wild, isn't
That
it?
is.
I did not know any road testing was involved. I wonder, is that just since Volkswagen?
No, actually, the OBD system, verification of OBD functionality has been a part of the process, part of the verification process for pretty much as long as I can remember. Now, the thing to remember about OBD systems is they weren't really regulated until 1996. So OBD2 was really required for gasoline vehicles in 1996, and came a little bit later for diesels. I think that it was 1999 or 2000 before it was required on diesels. But once the OBD2 system was a required element, that's when we had to go through that level of demonstration. What we've seen more recently is the more sophisticated the emission systems are on these vehicles, the longer it takes for all of those monitors to go through their processes. So with EPS, with SCR, all of that makes the process a little more complex.
Makes sense. There's more computers. There's more things talking, right?
I like it.
Exactly.
Is the process or testing standards wildly different for gas versus diesel, or is it just any vehicle on the road's not allowed to output more than this amount of emissions?
The processes are pretty much identical. There's one slight variation that actually has to do with the weight class of the vehicle. There's one test that's done a little bit differently with heavier vehicles. But the test process is pretty much identical for both gasoline and diesel. Now, one thing that used to be different is that the particulate mass, or the soot, was kind of strictly a diesel requirement, but they've actually added that to the gasoline testing regimen more recently, and that's because we've seen more use of direct injection in gasoline engines, and therefore we see more soot. And so that's become another regulated feature of gasoline vehicles. But the test process is pretty much identical. There is one aspect of gasoline that is a little more involved than diesel, and that is that gasoline vehicles have requirements, in addition to being having restrictions for what comes out of the tailpipe. They also have a standard for what it can evaporate from the vehicle. So basically, tailpipe emissions is what's coming out of the vehicle when it's running, and evaporative emissions is what's coming off of the vehicle when it's not running. So there's a whole different test setup for gasoline in that regard. Diesel fuel doesn't evaporate like gasoline does, so there's not a requirement for evaporative testing on diesel.
Walk us through a little bit of that, because me and Paul just looked at each other like, what did you just say? What does that mean when it's not running in evaporative, I can't even say that word, evaporating the fuel in a cold, not running situation?
Yeah. So think about this. If you took a bucket of gasoline and you left it outdoors, and you left it out for a couple of days, and the sun comes up and it shines, and that gasoline is going to start to evaporate. After 2 days, you're going to have less gasoline in that bucket than you did. Now, where did that gasoline go? It evaporated and it went into the atmosphere.
Okay.
So because of that, gasoline vehicles have systems on them that control where those fumes would go.
Okay.
So instead of evaporating into the atmosphere, they get captured by... You've probably heard of a charcoal canister, right?
Right.
The charcoal canister is a component that captures those fumes. And so the requirements for those vehicles is that over a 2-day or a 3-day period, they can't allow more than a given amount of fumes to escape from the vehicle. So they're basically testing to ensure that they're staying within those requirements.
I'm going to repeat this as diesel trucks are definitively cleaner than gas, period.
Now, that would be more of like an OEM standard, right? Like, there's really not many, that wouldn't be really a test in the aftermarket for performance-oriented purposes.
I don't know, it sounds like a filter. If I was a gas guy coming from the diesel world, wouldn't I just cut it out?
I mean,
I see why they test it, because it sounds like something people would just cut out of their vehicle if they wanted to.
Yeah, so evaporative emissions, generally speaking, the charcoal canister is not something that people tend to modify. The one aspect where that does happen is with anytime you're putting a different fuel tank on the vehicle.
Okay.
So, for example, there's companies that make larger fuel tanks, and they have to, if they're doing it for gasoline, they have to go through this evaporative testing, which is an entirely different type of testing, which we don't really need to talk about.
But, you literally just took my next question, because that was going to be the next thing. So it makes sense.
I mean, I have to describe it if you want. I mean, basically what happens is they take a vehicle and they put it inside a sealed box for 2 days and measure what comes off of it. That's really what it
Wow, that's crazy. That is crazy. So I'm thinking of SEMA Garage as being one big building with a bunch of garages inside a big building, essentially.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. Our headquarters is in Diamond Bar, California. We've got 14,000 square feet there where we have our emissions lab, and we also offer other services. We do digital scanning of vehicles. We provide that digital data to our members so that they can design products directly off of CAD files. We offer 3D printing services so that you can make your rapid prototypes. So there's a few other things that we do there, but we're 14,000 square feet there in Diamond Bar, and then we're now building a second SEMA Garage in the Detroit area.
Oh, wow.
That one's about 45,000 square feet.
Automotive mecca.
We'll have a lot of the same features. Yeah. And we'll have a lot of the same features there. We'll have an emissions lab, but we'll also be adding some capabilities for evaluating the ADAS systems on vehicles. ADAS is all the automated driving assistance systems, the lane keeping and anything that kind of automates the driving of the vehicle. These are all things that are now impacting our industry pretty heavily. So we're going to be adding equipment there that'll allow our members to evaluate their products related to the ADAS systems.
That's crazy.
So cool.
That is really neat.
I mean, it's interesting, too, to see the expansion going on because, Chris, again, you and I, we have seen the expansion in the diesel performance world rapidly over the last 8 years or whatever. So it would track that testing is going to rapidly follow because I remember...
The industry as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. I remember 10 years ago when some of the big fines started getting doled out to diesel performance, there was a lot of people saying the sky is falling, it's all over.
Yep.
And then even just recently, a few years ago, there's been people who are like, racing's dead, the sky is falling, it's all over. But with compliance testing and with access to things like rapid product development,
the tooling, R&D, just all the
digital scans to be able to figure out what you need to at home makes it, I would imagine, more accessible for smaller guys too.
Yeah.
To where it's not just multi-billion-dollar corporations who can afford a digital scan and develop a new product based around that. But having the access to go to a third party and use this stuff. Where do you see the future going for SEMA? What does this look like 5 and 10 years down the road? Or for SEMA Garage, more specifically?
I get this question every once in a while, and I think the fear is that, hey, if there's this push towards electric vehicles, what's going to happen to our industry? Is the internal combustion engine going to go away? I think the reality is the internal combustion engine is going to be around for a long time in some form or another. And the one thing that I have always seen, I can point you to articles that were written back in the 70s and 80s that said, oh my gosh, all this new emission stuff, where is our industry going? Well, here we are decades later and we're still thriving. And the reason is because our industry innovates and adapts. And that's always been the case, and I think that always will be the case. I also think that, even with a push towards electric, it's not going to shut the lights off on internal combustion immediately. We're going to always have, for the foreseeable future, we're going to have some level of internal combustion that we'll still be working with. And so I think that, what we're going to see is adaptation by our industry. We'll see some innovation, and we'll continue to thrive through that innovation.
That's awesome. Absolutely. Well said. Peter, was there anything that you would like to share with our listeners that we haven't had a chance to talk about already?
I think we've covered the bases. I'm always interested to talk about this kind of stuff. I think that it is this kind of mysterious area, but certainly if people are interested in learning more about emissions and what is actually involved and how to comply and all that kind of stuff, that's what we're here for. So you can certainly reach out to us at SEMA, and we'd be happy to answer those questions. I think we've covered a lot of that territory today.
Oh, that's awesome.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
You guys are welcome. It's great to chat with you, and I'm looking forward to maybe doing this again sometime.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Listeners, stick around. We got more Diesel Performance Podcasts coming at you right after a word from our sponsors.
Treat, protect, and enhance the performance of your diesel fuel system year-round with XDP's Diesel Power Plus fuel additive. Specially formulated for all grades of diesel fuel, XDP's Diesel Power Plus gives you an all-in-one fuel additive that cleans and protects your fuel injection system while also providing you with a cetane and lubricity increase. Not only does Diesel Power Plus enhance the performance of your fuel system, It provides you with additional protection against the damaging effects of corrosion, water, and the formulation of algae and bacteria. This concentrated year-round formula is for use in all seasons and helps control icing and freeze-up during those cold winter months. With a standard dosage of 1 ounce per 32 gallons of fuel, one bottle can treat up to 500 gallons of diesel fuel. To find out more about XDP's Diesel Power Plus, check out xdp.com or find a local dealer near you.
What is Worley Custom Fab's thermostat bypass valve, and why is it an important upgrade for your 2017 to 2019 L5P Duramax? 2017 to 2019 L5P Duramax trucks feature a unique thermostat assembly for the Allison transmission, which allows fluid to bypass the auxiliary cooler and use engine heat in the radiator coolant to reach ideal operating temps more quickly in cold weather. When the desired temperature is reached, the thermostat is supposed to open and allow fluid to flow forward into the auxiliary cooler, which helps maintain transmission fluid temperatures at a safe level. Now the issue. This thermostat is prone to get stuck closed, so when the fluid gets hot and reaches the point that it needs to be cooled via the auxiliary cooler, the fluid is instead bypassed by the closed thermostat and returned to the transmission uncooled. Hotter fluid breaks down quicker, which leads to poor fluid performance and potentially premature damage and shortened transmission life. If you tow with your truck or live in a warm climate, this bypass plug is a must. Whether your truck is a daily driver, work truck, tow rig, or competition race truck, this is an issue that plagues all 17 to 19 L5Ps. When running one of WC Fab's shop trucks at the drag strip, they noticed temperatures reaching the unsafe zone. After some investigation, they found the auxiliary cooler up front was cool to the touch. The hot fluid was not making its way to the cooler. Upon further research, they found that even factory stock trucks were experiencing the same issue. With this discovery, the thermostat bypass plug was born. The CAD-designed, CNC-machined, anodized billet aluminum bypass plug requires a simple 15-minute installation. WC Fab has been building high-performance transmissions for the L5P platform for many years now and immediately started including this made-in-the-USA piece with every transmission that they build. Tested in-house on both their shop trucks and customer trucks, the transmission cooler thermostat bypass plug for 2017 to 2019 L5P Duramax trucks can drop the fluid temperature from 15 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit by reducing fluid flow restriction to the transcooler. The Exergy Performance Fuel System Saver works. If you have a CP4 equipped fuel pump, which is commonly found on the 2011 to 2016 LML Duramax, and also the early 6.7 liter Ford Power Stroke engine, they're known for failure, period. Now, most of the time, if you put a lift pump on the truck, you'll prevent a lot of the potential failures. If you do regular maintenance, you can help prevent the potential failures. But at the end of the day, there's still a risk that no matter what you do, that CP4 could fail. And when they fail, they have a track record for sending all of the metal shavings downstream. So you end up needing a whole new fuel system, new lines, new injectors, new tubes, new everything. That could be very expensive. Even if you're under warranty or you find a bundle package for a great price, there's still a lot of labor that goes into that job. The fuel system saver increases the amount of protection post CP4. So it's not going to stop your CP4 from failing. What it's going to do is that, God forbid, the CP4 gives up and it starts to send metal debris through the truck. It's going to stop it before it hits the rest of your fuel system. And that's why they call it the fuel system saver. If you have a CP4 pump on your truck, you absolutely need to give DuramaxTuner.com a call today and get yourself a fuel system saver. Super Tech Jeremy Garnett, how the hell are you?
Wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for joining us today. Jeremy, we've had some really fun trucks to talk about here in the past. We've had some big builds. I know you're still working on that Hummer build that's coming along.
Yeah. I work on it every chance I get.
Guys, if you're not already doing it, jump over to Instagram, follow jgarnett00. You'll be able to see his work. He's posting parts of the project on his Instagram, so you guys can jump on and check it out and see what it's all about and see what day in the life of a mechanic really is. All fun, from what I see.
Yeah, we're getting deep now.
I dig it. All right, but I know you brought a really good truck for us to talk about today. Hit me with it. What's the truck?
This one's an 06 LBZ. Just a single rear wheel crew cab with a ABS type issue, trans downshift issue.
ABS and trans issue.
Yeah.
Okay. My head immediately jumps to wiring or control module, like real common to have A40s crap out on these.
Right.
You get a static discharge from that fan belt and it wipes them out. But that usually will throw you into limp mode. So tell me a little bit more about the symptoms. Is he getting into limp mode? Is he what's he complaining about?
So no limp mode. So like what you said, usually with the A40 issues, you won't see a prindle or anything like that. None of that. His issue is coming to a stop. It goes 2-1 downshift back to 1-2 downshift as it's stopping. So the truck
2-1 downshift, 1-2 upshift.
Yep, and then the truck jumps.
Ooh,
so
yeah.
you're coming to a stop. The truck's like it's just jerking forward.
Do you know what vehicle used to do that? The van. Do you remember we had
Yes.
we had that Duramax
We
van?
did have the van.
We had a Duramax van that when we put the DSP file, so we had to run a truck operating system
Yes.
on it. And when you did that, you could do switch on the fly, but every time you came to a stop, you would get to a full stop and it would stop, and then it would try to push through the brakes and jump forward.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like that.
Yeah. Similar. Yep.
Man, that is not a fun feeling.
And it's it's erratic. It's not every stop, so it's like you don't know when it's going to happen.
That's a lot less fun.
Right.
At least with the van, you could like plan it and like, oh, I'm definitely not going to rear end the guy I've been tailgating for the last 20 minutes at the stop sign.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Especially towing a trailer.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's fucking scary, dude.
Yeah. So we've been all over the board on this truck. I mean, so first thing, looking at just data logging it, just looking at our scan tools data.
Well, when it's erratic, you're trying to log it having a problem, and if it doesn't have a problem in like a repeatable scenario,
exactly,
you end up just logging for fun.
Yes. Well, because you don't know when it's going to happen, so I'm trying to data log it for fun. So when it does happen, we have the info.
Yeah.
So doing that, it's like I'm just driving this truck for 2 days with my scan tool. In the center console, I'm just driving. It'll do it. Okay, finally, hit pause, hit record, and hit my screen save so I can actually watch what it's doing on my scan tool. Then we get back to the shop, and I'm like, okay, let me go grab the EasyLink or the V3 and try to data log that, and I won't do it. Because now I want to see more PIDs than what I can see on my Snap-on scanner. I want to see what I can see on the V3. So
sure.
Do that, and then finally it does it. Okay, put a turbine sensor in it. So because it's the turbine, what you see is the turbine sensor, which is the number 2 sensor in the trans. You see it jump from going to a stop. It's supposed to go from like 600 RPM down, slowly down to 0 as the truck comes to 0.
Okay.
So what this was doing is while the truck was acting up, it would go to 0, jump to 600 RPM, back to 0.
Oh.
So there's your 2-1 shift.
Okay, yeah.
So here we are. Okay, cool. Let's put a sensor in this thing. Like we think we have a messed up sensor. After we checked the wiring from the TCM all the way down, realized we didn't have a wiring issue. We put a sensor in it. Then we're like, okay, do this. Drive the thing for 3 days. Perfect. No issues. All right. Done. Send it. And guy picks up truck, comes back. He goes, I still got an issue, guys.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we're like, no way. Like, we've literally put 300 miles on this truck. And, like, there's just no way. Brings it back, and again, we drive it. Nothing. Truck starts acting up.
No codes.
So.
Fuel system.
Well, so we've... Again, data logging.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I wanted to go back to the data log.
Right.
Because we want to watch fuel, watch actual desired, watch see what the regulator's doing.
That's what I was like, LBZ, maybe the regulator's old and it's pushing open, so like you're getting a bunch of fuel. And
I went as far as thinking the
converter's
converter's going bad.
Oh, sure.
Because, LBZs do have, bad converters. So, the converter starts coming apart.
They do usually, and not always, but usually you spot a bad converter throwing it in reverse.
Reverse or pushing through the brake too.
Yeah.
It wants to add a stop. It's like trying to push through the brake. But this truck has a trans in it. Okay, it's not our trans, but it is a built trans.
But it's a built trans.
So it does have a converter in it. It does have a Garand converter. It's a little older, so
They don't. It's pretty. They can fail. You're a mechanic, right? So you got to check everything.
Right,
it's like
right,
trust but verify. But like,
yeah. So it's
pretty unlikely.
And here, DJ, our trans builder, and I have been over and over and over this whole thing. Like, dude, it cannot be an internal problem. It just
right.
It just can't.
There's no burnt fluids.
Right.
There's nothing on the magnet.
Exactly.
You're like,
I mean,
"Meh."
there's just no way. I mean, it can be internal.
And what about running like wide open throttle, working it hard?
Working the heart, perfect. I mean, the truck just shifts and just smooth as could be. The only problem with it is coming down to a stop. So the shifts going up are absolutely perfect every single time. The shifts coming down.
Whose tuning's on the truck?
It is ours.
Oh, it's our tuning.
It is ours. So what we actually did is through this whole process, I did grab another TCM. Went up to the guys up north and
Yep.
was like, hey, put a stock file on this thing for me. Just put a stock file on it.
Fucking mechanics flashing it to stock. It's not the tune.
I know it's not.
It's not the tune.
It's always the tune.
Sometimes it's the tune.
It's always the tune. No. So I'm like, just put a stock file on this thing. I want to see what it does with the stock file, and I want to see what it does with the tuned.
Any change?
No change. No.
And you can't get the problem to repeat.
No.
I'm mystified. This is what is going on here?
Exactly. I mean, we're 7 days into this truck. I mean, and
this went from a gremlin to a nightmare real quick.
Well, that's what I mean. It's like we're 7 days into it, and so the other day it was like, man, the brakes on this truck are just shit. Like the brakes themselves are shit.
Okay.
Like the pedals like soft, and it's just an old truck with 300,000 miles on it.
So it's like 80% of customer trucks, the brakes are shit.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
90% of the trucks we work on
right.
here, just rusted out.
Brand new turbo,
and
stock brakes.
I'm like, we need to put brand new brakes on this truck. And we just need to put some brakes on this truck. And what it ended up coming down being is that the ABS was activating where you didn't feel it in the pedal, and the truck was sliding forward, and then it didn't know what the trans was going to do.
Oh, because it's tracking movement,
right, through the ABS.
Oh,
but the turbine sensor didn't know what to do when the truck was sliding forward, not the brake sliding, coming to a stop.
Holy shit!
Yeah.
And it wasn't like squealing or any. And there's oh my.
And
God.
all it was is that the rotors on it were just rusted over, and the slides and the calipers weren't working properly. So we just ended up doing a complete brake job to this thing. Got it stop on a dime, and there's no issues.
And customer is like brand new truck.
Brand new truck. Never had an issue.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and the thing is before that, like any truck that we drive every single day, like you would never think of a brake issue. Just never think. It's just like every other truck we drive.
Yeah. They all have mediocre brakes at best.
Exactly. It's
best.
Every truck. This one here, just the truck did not like.
They were so bad.
Yep.
Man.
And it was so bad, but it wasn't so bad not to drive.
Right.
So it's like one of those things that you just look over.
Sure.
Like, why would you look at that?
Yeah, none of what you described had me thinking, brake job in its future.
Right. Brake job is going to fix my trans issue. Like, who would have thought?
I love that. All right, guys. So, listeners, if you're having transmission issues, what you're going to want to do... No, I'm just joking.
Don't do that.
That's awesome. What is our pro tip for our listeners this week?
Sometimes it's the easy stuff, man. Just try to maintenance, keys, like brakes, just easy stuff. Just try to, look over everything and just don't take anything for granted, like brakes.
Do your maintenance first, and brakes fucking matter.
Right. And don't take anything for granted. I mean, I surely did, and look what happened.
Yeah, 7 days later, look what happened.
Yeah.
I love that. Awesome. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing your time with our listeners.
No problem. Have a good day.
Guys, stick around. We got more Diesel Performance Podcasts coming at you. All right, guys, here we are bringing back the master of customer service, Sean Lynn. Sean, how the hell are you?
Good. How about you, Paul?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for joining us. Sean, we've been working on this knowledge-based segment of the show, which is really just we want to get into more troubleshooting and how-tos and like practical, usable knowledge for diesel owners. And you've been great at helping us out with that. But I don't know if I necessarily set you up with riveting content just reading off the knowledge base articles. So last week we tried out with Chris doing some troubleshooting for me. And I really, the whole time I heard Chris troubleshooting, I'm like, Chris, this is all correct, but we need a specialist. Like, that's what this show is we bring on specialists and experts to talk about their field. And Sean, you are an expert in calibrated power Duramax tuner customer service.
Yeah, we see a little bit of everything here and learning more every single day.
There you go, man. Today, guys, I am going to be I'm going to pretend to be a customer here, and I'm going to give Sean a couple of questions that I think you get on a regular basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. So let's start off. Sean, I own a 2017 Cummins. It is a 3500 HD dual rear wheel. I have the Laramie package, so it's really nice. I got about 40,000 miles on it. I just bought my EasyLink tunes a week ago. I got the auto agent today. What do I do next?
The first thing you're going to do is get it plugged into your truck, get the app downloaded on your phone, and basically all you have to do is link up the vehicle. When you sign in, create an account, it'll ask you if you want to link the vehicle. It'll give you a whole list of tunes, 3 different folders, all have the same power levels. We just change up the trans tuning a bit between the 3 folders. And that's typically the most common question we get, is when someone gets the phone in their hand and they say, okay, I have 3 different folders, I got a bunch of tunes, what do I choose? Which one do I go with?
What are the folders called? What is this?
We have a folder called Standard Shift Schedule, Mild TCM Tuning, and then Elevated Shifts.
Okay, so the Standard Shift Schedule, does that still have trans tuning in it?
It does.
Okay. And what kind of things do you know are changed in the trans tunes in that file compared, because the other folders still have trans tuning too, right? Mm-hmm. What's different?
So between the 3 of them, mild trans tuning is the basically smallest change in shifting and such. It only changes line pressure. So if you like the way the truck drives stock and you just want to keep it that way, little bump in line pressure, that's going to be the one you're going to want to go with.
I like that. Now, one of the benefits of having a small bump in line pressure is increased clutch holding capacity. So my clutches aren't going to be stronger, but if I put more pressure on them, they're going to hold longer, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, and then what is the third option?
So the other option would be elevated shift points. And typically we recommend this if customers are running large tires or they just want the truck to stay in the gear a bit longer. They don't want it to lug as much. They want a bit more throttle response out of it.
You know, and I really like this tune personally. Now, I've said many times on the show, guys, I have a habit of driving really aggressively from 0 to 60 and then like an old grandma after that. But that 0 to 60 is really important to me. And I know when we first started messing around with this 4th and 5th gen Cummins, these 68s were notorious for short shifting. So in other words, I would go jump in the truck, put an engine tune on it, smash that throttle pedal at the stop sign, and then I would click off 1, 2, 3, 4 shifts by the time I was at 40 miles an hour. And that means that I'm not using all of the torque my truck is capable of producing. It's one of the huge benefits of a 6.7 Cummins is it has this really wide torque band. So elevating those shifts, that gives customers or end users the ability to kind of stretch out that gear and use the power in that gear for a little bit longer before jumping to the next one. Do you know of any of the drawbacks? Who would we recommend probably wouldn't run an elevated shift option?
I would say that if you have stock tires and you just are looking for maximum efficiency out of it, then elevated shifts is probably not for you. But if you got larger tires or you drive it more like a hot rod than an actual truck, that's where elevated shifts would come in.
That's awesome. Hey, Sean, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with our listeners. Guys, stick around. Chris and I are going to wrap up the show here right now. All right, Chris. I want to give a huge shout out to Peter and also to everybody over at SEMA Garage that helped get him on the show.
Right.
Really appreciate you guys.
There were some strings pulled for that one. I'm glad we were able to make that happen.
Absolutely, we're excited. We kind of tried to put the screws on him, so we know we can get him back on the show here in the future.
We might be going on a trip soon.
I'm really hoping we can put that
Fingers
together.
crossed.
I'm so excited. We got a lot of other cool stuff going on here in the near future, guys. So make sure you have liked and subscribed on Facebook, and of course, go join our Facebook group, Fans of Diesel Performance Podcast.
There's some traffic on there. There's guys commenting on there, asking questions. It's a great network for guys to, get some information and gain some knowledge. There's not a lot of crap that's going on in there, which is nice.
Yeah, we made some
people really want to help
early on that kind of said like, hey, if you're if anybody asks a new guy question, even if it's been asked 10,000 times, answer his question. Don't use the search bar or use stupid newbie. So like if you're new to diesel and you just want to ask a question to some educated people, you can do that. They're not going to rag on you or anything like that.
And you go on there from time to time, Paul.
Yeah, once I get tagged. So.
Yeah, true. Me too.
I check the notifications. I make sure everybody's happy. I see if there's any podcast questions, and then I kind of try to let the community do what the community's going to do.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. This has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Hemke.
Thanks for listening.